Welcome back to the National Defense. It's Randy Miller, and Deborah Roberts is back with us. She's an award-winning ABC News correspondent, co-anchor of the prestigious news magazine 20’. And how is Mr. Rooker doing?
Oh, he's doing fine. He's doing fine. Let's move on. As I always say to him, I'm not talking about you. I'm
I'm
talking
not
about me.
talking about you. Listen, I don't know what kind of neighbors you have, but I hope they're not like the ones in your story here. There's a great episode of 20’, airing tomorrow. ABC, it's 9, 8 Central, and streaming on Hulu. But these are people maybe that won't get Neighbor of the Year.
I would say Susan Lawrence certainly won't get Neighbor of the Year, especially when you hear from her neighbors and what they thought of her. I think it's so interesting because all of us can relate to neighbors, right? That
Right,
maybe
right.
you don't necessarily get along with, or maybe you find to be a little odd. I mean, I've got a neighbor that we've had a little tension with, complaining when we had painters here at the house and the noise was a little much. We've all had that. But has it ever risen to the point where it's hostile and that there's gunfire? And that's what sets this one apart. Literally, a neighbor, 35-year-old Ajika Owens, a mom of 4 children in this little neighborhood. And it's a small neighborhood. I went down to Ocala, Florida, and visited this neighborhood to kind of get a feel for it. And
Sure.
and and what we heard from the neighbors is, this was a community where everybody was just working. It's a real working community. Families just trying to make it, a number of single parent households. But the kids had this real camaraderie and they were running around during the summer months and, out in each other's yards and homes up until dark, that's the way many of us grew up. But
Sure.
one of the neighbors, Susan Lawrence, just did not like the noise. She found the kids to be a nuisance. And so that was the one neighbor who was sort of like out of touch with the vibe, is what the neighbors
Mhm.
tell us. And there had been tension that had been building over time. And she apparently resorted to calling the kids names, racial slurs. There was a big problem there. And Ajika, at one day in June, goes over to confront her for the way she's treated one of her children. And there's a bullet that comes through the door, a locked, closed door. A bullet comes through the door, and she's killed. How could this happen? And that's the question we pose on 20’.
And she's standing there with her 10-year-old daughter. Is that right?
Her daughter and her son. Her
Oh,
son, who I think it was 10, the daughter's a little bit younger, and they witnessed this. And can you just imagine these kids are still carrying this around with them? And you'll get to hear from that boy who was there, Izzy, who was standing right there. He's just
oh
such a
wow.
such an amazing kid to talk about the loss of his mother, but also how he's managed to process this today and kind of finding a voice to speak out about violence.
Oh man, yeah, it's incredible. We're talking to Deborah Roberts here on the National Defense. The 20’, episode airing tomorrow night at 9, 8 Central, streaming on Hulu. And it's interesting because we're based here in Kansas City, and we just had something like that happen,
Mm.
where there was an older gentleman that was behind a door, and somebody came up to sell Boy Scouts cookies. I don't know what it was,
Ah,
but
ah,
just shot him through.
ah,
Didn't kill him,
ah.
but then
Thankfully.
yeah. But I mean, what is? I don't
What's
get it.
going on? What's going
Yeah,
on? Yeah,
yeah,
that's what you're thinking. I think that's the provocative part of this story. What is going on? We are in a very polarized time, right? The
right,
neighbors and people who are on edge, who don't like each other, who, don't see eye to eye, who are suspicious of each other, who are armed. And in this case, I don't think Ajika Owens thought that her neighbor was armed. I think the kids told us they may have seen her brandish a weapon at one point, but nobody is expecting an argument to erupt into gunfire. And to your point, it does leave you a little bit on edge now. What used to be just not even a friendly dispute, but just a dispute now can just hit a level that you never ever would imagine. I mean, somebody shooting through a door and saying they feel threatened because somebody rang the doorbell. I
right.
mean, it's really pretty incredible stuff. And I think it's a warning to all of us, sadly, that we've got to tread a little lightly with people and
Yep.
and be a little bit more cautious when you approach people. But how can you anticipate something like that?
Right, right. And now she was charged what with manslaughter, right?
She was charged with manslaughter, and
Uh,
and the family and others were really disappointed that she wasn't charged with murder.
right,
Why this
right.
what? But the lawyer, and in our 20’, episode, we speak with the Owens lawyer, and he's from Ocala. He lives elsewhere now, but he's from Ocala, kind of understands that community. And he wanted to go with charges that he felt would stick. He wanted to
Mm.
make sure he went to court with something he felt he could prove, and he thought manslaughter was the way to do it. And Susan Lawrence has been sentenced to 25 years in prison. This is a woman who's in her 60s now. Very well could be a life sentence for her.
Right.
So that family at least feels satisfied that there was some sense of justice. Maybe not exactly what they had wanted, but there's a sense of justice, and somebody did pay a price for what happened to Ajika Owens.
Yeah, we're talking to Deborah Roberts here on the National Defense 2020 episode airing tomorrow night on ABC 9, 8 Central and streaming on Hulu. I'm so glad that it streams on Hulu too, because
Yeah,
I can't get to every one of those,
yeah,
and so you can follow back up. And these Deborah, the thing I like about what you do on 2020 and all the stories that surround that, these are things that you talk about, right? I mean,
mhm,
you watch this, and then you can't wait to talk to your buddy about it, or a neighbor about it,
yeah,
just to
yeah,
say, hey, this is this is something you need to see, and it is kind of a look into our society right now, and what people are doing. But you do kind of have that sense of you don't want to go too far with people.
yeah. Well, you certainly don't. And I think after viewing this episode, you will feel that. And, in no way are we trying to imply that Ajika Owens shouldn't have come to defend her children. I mean, she didn't expect to be shot. Susan Lawrence probably could have taken a breather. And interestingly, Susan had already called the police. She had developed a reputation in the neighborhood for constantly calling the police. And
Ah,
you'll hear from those officers, some of those responding officers in our episode. So it was like this constant thing that was happening. The kids even called her a Karen in the neighborhood, someone who's constantly reporting, some small thing that's happening. The police were actually on the way to her home when this shooting happened.
oh
So
wow,
had she taken a breather, even with Ajika pounding on her door saying, I want to
yeah,
talk to you, the police would have gotten there and possibly sorted this out. Now, was it eventually going to lead to this? I don't know. But that's the irony here. The police were actually on the way when this
Hmm.
shooting happened. So for Susan to say she felt threatened at that moment, there really is a big question about that. But to your point, your greater point, these stories really do stick with us because
yeah,
what is the takeaway? What can we learn? And when we can, of course, we try to give you something to hold on to.
sure.
Maybe if there's a violent situation that happened with a woman, with her husband, or some other family member, you might be able to take away some red flag warnings. I don't
Mhm.
know that those existed with Susan Lawrence. I don't know that anybody thought that this would ever happen, but it certainly did cast a pall over this neighborhood long after this shooting happened.
Well, I got a buddy of mine that's a cop, and he said, the number one call that they respond to is domestic disturbance. But
Hmm.
right down the list there, number two or three are neighbor situations.
Hmm.
And to have to walk into a situation like that, and just as a cop, that's a scary situation in itself. But now, did she have when the cops got there? Were there any reporting about how she felt? Did she feel remorse? Did she feel what was her takeaway?
Well, that's what's so interesting when you see our report because there's a lot of body cam footage, and you will see,
Oh,
how all this progressed. Oh, absolutely. You'll see from the police's perspective, when they would get called. And to your point, it is interesting. They were like, a parent in the middle of two squabbling kids, right?
right,
Let me
right,
hear your side. Let me hear your side. Susan was quite frustrated why they hadn't arrested Ajika. Well, what are they going to arrest her for? Her kids are being a little bit loud in the neighborhood, or her kid
right.
walked on your property. There was constant, I think, stress for the police trying to sort this out. But I was really surprised. You figure when a shooting like this happens, there's a mom of four children who now is gone.
Mm,
You caused this,
mm.
even if you didn't intend to, which is what Susan says was the situation. I was really surprised that she doesn't take responsibility. And you'll get to hear from her actually in our
Oh,
report
wow.
tonight. You'll get to hear from her. She does not think she did anything wrong. She feels that other people pushed her to this point, and that this was not really her fault. And you'll see on that body cam footage, she was surprised when police took her into custody. She didn't think she should be taken into custody. It's fascinating to see
Wow.
how this all played out, and you'll be right inside there for the ride with us on 2020.
And Deborah, that's the other things you guys do such a great job of. You really wrap everything in a bow, and you've got so many different, like you said, the body cam, the different kind of footage around there, and that part in itself is fascinating. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to see it. Thank you so much for taking the time, and great to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Always a pleasure and appreciate you guys. And please don't forget, like you said, stream us on Hulu the next day if for whatever
Absolutely.
reason you missed the episode.